At times, animals can surprise us. Watch as this bear carries a dying baby to the road and pleads for help. What unfolds next will leave you astonished. Aaron was very tired. He had been driving for a long time. He wanted to surprise his parents by coming home earlier than they thought. But driving through the night made him more tired than he expected. He used to be able to stay awake for days when he was in the military. But now he felt exhausted after just one night without sleep. He realized he was getting older, even though he still felt like he could handle anything. He was close to the next town where he planned to rest and have breakfast. He also wanted to warm his hands with a hot cup of coffee. Despite having the heating on in his car, his hands felt very cold because of the sudden drop in temperature. Although it was spring, the weather felt more like winter. Feeling sleepy, Aaron rubbed his eyes. When he opened them, he saw something huge in front of him. His pickup truck screeched to a halt. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. For a moment, Aaron thought he was seeing things. Could he be asleep and not realize it? That had to be it, because what he was seeing couldn't be true. The bear had a small baby in its mouth. Where had the baby come from? Why did the bear have him, and was he injuring the child? But after checking his eyes and even pinching himself, he still saw the same thing. He knew he had little chance against the bear, and he had no firearm, but he had to try and save the baby. Aaron jumped out and went closer to the bear, but he couldn't believe what the bear did next. This was not what he was expecting. The bear didn't seem aggressive. Instead, his eyes were sad and sweet. It looked almost pleading. Was he asking Aaron for help? Aaron was trying to figure out how to get the baby away from the bear when he was surprised once more. The bear knew that the man had to care for the child, and he was going to make that easier. The bear took the baby gently from his mouth and placed him on the ground, then backed away to the tree line. He felt safer close to the forest, but he wanted to make sure that the man would help this baby. Aaron ran closer and picked the baby up. Then his heart dropped. The child's clothing was soaked, and the baby was also very blue. Was he beyond help? Aaron couldn't allow himself to believe that the child didn't have a mark on him from the bear's massive jaws. The bear had carried the child so gently that Aaron could be sure it wasn't the bear that hurt him. Aaron had to be careful while treating the child because he didn't know what happened or how the child had been injured. He had his first aid kit in the car, but none of the equipment was made for a baby. He had to adapt to try and figure out why the child wasn't breathing. First, Aaron checked the baby's throat with a light and used a syringe to make sure nothing was blocking it. He called emergency services, who promised to send an ambulance, but it would take some time. Aaron was on his own for now. He put his phone on the passenger seat and focused on the baby, who still wasn't breathing normally. Aaron knew he had to help the baby breathe properly. The baby was very small, probably still a newborn. Aaron had to be careful not to hurt him with his large hands. He gently rubbed the baby's neck and tapped his feet, trying to help him breathe. Suddenly, the baby took a deep breath and started crying. The bear, who had been watching, stood up to see what was happening. Aaron showed the bear that the baby was okay. The blue color in the baby's face was going away. Aaron took off the baby's wet clothes and wrapped him in one of his own shirts to keep him warm. The baby was alive, but Aaron didn't know if he had any serious injuries. He didn't have the right tools to examine the baby properly. It was scary and frustrating for Aaron, who was used to facing challenges without fear. But thankfully, the ambulance finally arrived. Aaron was grateful to hand over the child. They wanted to know where the mother was, but of course, Aaron didn't know. They listened to the baby's lungs and they believed the child probably had pneumonia from the cold. It wasn't good for an infant. They had to get him to the hospital as quickly as they could. Aaron wondered where the mother was too. The forest next to him was massive. Searching for the spot where the bear found the baby was going to be too much for one person to do. He would report the event to the sheriff when going through the town. He couldn't stand leaving with the mission only half finished. Somewhere had to have been an adult who was with the boy, but he didn't have much choice. He went back to the vehicle, ready to go. When the bear made a strange sound, like a mix of a bark and a growl, Aaron knew it wanted his attention. He thought the bear had left after the ambulance arrived, but it seemed the bear was still there and wanted Aaron to follow. It sounded crazy, but Aaron felt he had to. He followed the bear into the overgrown forest, feeling the adrenaline pumping and keeping him going. He wondered if he was acting insane, following a bear into the unknown instead of having breakfast. Where was the bear leading him? He trusted that the animal wanted to show him something, but he might just be chasing a wild animal all around the forest. For moments, he considered going back to his vehicle, but then he saw something that wiped all those thoughts away. In front of him, in the river, was a car. From the marks on the mud, it was clear that it came down the steep bank from the street above. The front of the car was completely covered in water. It stood nose down in the water. If the mother was there in the front seat, then there was no hope. She would have drowned by now. One of the back wheels was shredded, and it seemed to have popped. Was that how they ended up in the river? He needed to phone the emergency department, but that was when he realized his phone was still in the front seat of his truck, where he chucked it to look after the baby. He was on his own. He went into the river, swimming to the side of the car. The back had filled with water too, but it wasn't as far. There, he gave a sigh of relief. There was a woman in the back seat, and there was no one in front. She must have climbed over to her baby to try and get out. She released the baby from the car seat and opened his window. And then she passed out. The infant car seat was almost covered in water. It would not have ended well if the child had stayed there. She was still unconscious now, because she had released the baby. The bear was able to pull him out, then he went looking for help. The bear saved the baby, but without the mother doing everything she could, he wouldn't have been able to. She had used her last strength to save her child. With his remaining strength, Aaron pulled the mother out and gently placed her down to check her. She had a big bump on her head, and there was blood on her stomach, indicating potential internal bleeding. Aaron couldn't leave her to find help. Although he was worried about moving her in case of spinal injuries, it was a life-or-death situation. He carried her back to his car, which felt like it took a long time. Walking with a woman in his arms was difficult, and he tried to carry her without moving her too much, as she was very ill and her breathing was shallow. Aaron reached the vehicle and noticed the bear was gone, having ensured the mother was safe. He called emergency services again, but with no available ambulance, he decided to drive the mother to the hospital himself. He drove quickly, fearing for the baby's life, and was relieved to see the hospital ahead. The medical team immediately attended to the mother and baby, who were both in critical condition. The sheriff arrived and identified the mother, and Aaron left them in the hospital's care. He then went to his parents' home, exhausted but grateful for the successful rescue, despite the unbelievable help from a bear.